Lazaro. I am first and foremost a mother to a child who has been gravely affected by the Hague Convention. I'm also a student of social and human services and human rights, working to end violence against children in Hague Convention cases. When the Hague Convention is discussed, the focus is almost always on the legal process of the return. The moment authorities hear the word child abduction, alarms sound without asking why a mother fled or whether the child might be safer where they are. Judges and officials feel pressure to uphold the authority of such a powerful convention, and the easiest way to protect themselves is to comply and order the child's return. What is rarely acknowledged is what happens after the return. After a child is torn from a protective mother's arms, that silence hides a devastating truth. Return is not always, and very often, is not simply in the best interest of the child. I'm sharing my daughter's story so that courts and policymakers can no longer ignore the post-return realities. Because behind every case number is a child who deserves safety. Some of you may know my story through a journalist named Olivia Gentile. She has amplified the voices of mothers and children affected by the Hague Convention. I fled Spain with my daughter to protect us from escalating violence. For years, I endured relentless emotional abuse in the form of coercive control, a term that then was foreign to me. There was also physical abuse. At 7 months pregnant, I was thrown out of a car, bruised up and in shock. I was left in a field for hours. That's only one of the incidents. The hidden abuse, the constant criticism, intimidation, coercion, and manipulation was even harder to escape, and it was harder for me to prove. My daughter suffered too. She described times when her father locked her outside for hours. During COVID, he forced me to stay in his home if I wanted access to her. The breaking point came when he charged at our 5-year-old, screaming he would kick her down the stairs. I stepped between them and I called the police, and the police told us that we could leave. During the lockdown, we didn't have anywhere to go. It is human instinct to run towards safety. When something goes wrong abroad, whether on holiday, at work, or in a relationship, people instinctively return home. Mothers are no different, except our instinct is even stronger. When our children are threatened, our only choice is to protect them. That is not a crime, that is not abduction, that is survival, the most basic human right. One of the most disturbing events happened before we first fled Spain. My daughter was 3 at the time. I arrived early at her school and found her in a secluded area with her pants down, with 2 older boys touching her inappropriately. I was horrified. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't bring her back to that school. When I confronted her father, he dismissed it as normal childhood behavior and threatened to cut off financial support if I did not return my daughter to that school. In a recorded meeting with the teachers, the school director, and her father, they confirmed what I had witnessed. They explained the school had implemented, without my knowledge, a so-called child sexual exploration program overseen by a psychologist in Barcelona. Her father endorsed this program, and I was left alone as the only one who would protect my daughter, and the only way to do that was to leave. I documented everything as best I could under such immense pressure. His drug business, his violence, his neglect. A forensic audio expert confirmed the recordings that I had were authentic, the GPS location of his house and his voice, but he denied these claims. Still, the Spanish courts ignored my evidence. I left Spain during my court-ordered visitation, which legally meant my actions could not be classified as abduction. At most, it was retention, as I didn't return after my court-ordered holiday. But despite the danger to my daughter, the Hague petition against me succeeded. The day the U.S. Marshals ripped my daughter from my arms, screaming, kicking, and begging not to go, was the most traumatic moment of my life. But it was only the beginning of what post-return looked like for me and my daughter. After the U.S. ruling, I was left with unbearable grief and trauma, and the impossible burden of fighting custody in Spain without having any resources. I was branded a child abductor for doing nothing more than protecting my daughter. I took on extra jobs to pay lawyers, even while ill, because I could not afford to lose what little ground I had left after losing the Hague case. There was no time to be sick, to heal, to recover. Months later, I returned to Spain with the help of supporters, and even with court-ordered visitation, her father constantly obstructed me, claiming that she was sick, that she didn't want to see me, or that I had requested my visit a day early or a day late. He cast himself as the victim while portraying me as irrational whenever he could. I stayed silent and I swallowed my pain, afraid of what he might do, just to hold on to little time that I was allowed with her. Over the next 2 years, I lived each day for the chance to be with my daughter again. I traveled back and forth to Spain until I finally secured remote work and a home in Barcelona. My stability and renewed strength seemed to anger him. I worked tirelessly to build resources in Spain and to provide my daughter with everything she needed when she was with me. For many mothers, these hurdles are insurmountable. We are often without citizenship or immigration papers, without work permits, and unable to speak the language of the requesting state. Those who are married cannot rely on spousal sponsorship again, since the law requires a marriage to be intact and on good terms. Many of us are left with no money and no legal path to housing. I had to overcome all of this without having the resources of a resident. It was nearly impossible, but I found a way to survive, and it was always just like I was surviving. Month after month, I tried to enforce the parenting plan, but he continued his course of control over our lives. My daughter and I were left in tears at every separation, as I promised her a better future or more time together. But each step I took forward only triggered further retaliation from her father. There is no automatic criminal case after a Hague ruling. The petitioning parent must actively choose to press charges, and he did. He pursued criminal charges against me in Spain. He asked for the maximum prison sentence of 5 years and 30,000 euros in emotional damages, and criminal charges for non-payment of child support for the time that she was with me in the US. Shortly after, we received news that I had won the US appeal vacating the original Hague ruling, the very ruling that had sent my daughter away. It no longer existed. In retaliation, he cut off calls with my daughter, refused visitation, and sent threats. I wanted justice, but fighting the decision in the US courts was worthless, since they had already forced my daughter out of the country. Now our fate was in the hands of the Spanish courts. Possession is 10/10 of the law in Hague cases. I never wanted endless litigation. I always begged him to seek therapy and agree to an international parenting plan that served our daughter. But for peace, for stability, for her future, and with realistically no other choice, I signed a legal agreement to enter into mediation. Her father agreed not to further the criminal charges against me and agreed to give more visitation with my daughter. But he never complied with what he had agreed to, and still he's faced no consequences for this non-compliance. In June of 2023, he pulled my daughter out of school early and took her to Ireland without any notice. This was a real abduction. Yet no authority acted, nobody rushed to my aid as they had done for him, nobody called him a child abductor. Instead, it was the opposite. Doors closed and I was left alone. 7 weeks pregnant, I drove across Spain, took a ferry to Ireland, and entered yet another foreign legal system to try to be closer to my daughter, although he had already separated us for many months. For the next 7 months, I struggled through my pregnancy, meeting lawyers, social services, and attending countless court hearings in Ireland, defending both my rights and my daughter's rights, all while facing his accusations. He called me a crazy American mother who had kidnapped his daughter. He even filed a restraining order against me and told the courts I was a murderer and an arsonist. He repeated these lies in both Spanish and Irish courts to block me from my child. Finally, when I had disproved his baseless claims and secured a Hague court date, he told the courts he was returning to Spain and then disappeared with my daughter again. I had no idea where they had gone, or even if they were in fact still back in Spain. Without my knowledge, they had briefly returned to Spain at one point in the summer. His cousin's ex-wife called me one day and said there had been a house fire, and my daughter had been forced to jump out of a second-story window to survive this fire. She could have died in this fire. Her dog, the only one she said she trusted, was killed in this fire. Instead of consoling her, her father and his wife campaigned to accuse me of arson and attempted murder. They told my daughter over and over that I had tried to kill her. They repeated this in courts, in her school, to her friends and community members, posted on social media, poisoning her whole world against me. The case was eventually closed. I was never registered as a suspect. I was registered as a witness. I believe this was because I had information about his previous warehouse fire, when a 7-story building registered to his name burned to the ground due to a marijuana grow. But even though the case was closed, the trauma remained, and as did his manipulation. He twisted the fire against me, forcing my daughter to believe that her own mother wanted her dead. The only way to turn my daughter against me was convincing her that I had tried to kill her. The last time I held my daughter, she was 8. She is almost 11 now. I have missed birthdays, milestones, and the everyday joy of just being her mother and watching her grow up. She lives with a man who once threw her pregnant mother from a car, who dismissed sexual assault against her as normal, who used every institution to alienate her from me, and I am prohibited from even gathering evidence of her current condition. No one will help me because I am labeled a child abductor. The Hague claims to act in the best interest of the child, yet once a child is returned, there is no follow-up, no data, no protection. Mothers like me are silenced while abusers are empowered. I have endured threats, harassment, false accusations, and profound grief. My daughter was placed at risk, ripped from her mother, and handed to someone who disregards her safety, her well-being, and her human rights. The system abandoned her. This is not an accident. It is built into the Hague system. Courts order returns and then look away. No one asks, is this child safe? Is she thriving? Can she love both of her parents? I pursued every legal remedy, reports, evidence, legal motions, psychologist reports, social services. Nothing protected my daughter. Nothing restored our bond. Instead, retaliation escalated and alienation deepened. The Spanish Supreme Court refused to hear my case. I live under the daily threat of prison for bringing my daughter home to safety, while her father abducted her across borders without any consequence. Hague mothers hope and pray for the day when no child is torn from their mother in the name of this law. We hope for the day when protection is not called abduction, when our love for our children is not punished. We hope for the day when our children are safe, their voices are heard, and the convention finally serves in the best interests of the child and not the power of the abuser. Until that day comes, the Hague system will remain complicit in the harm it claims to prevent. And that day must come because every morning I wake with my younger baby beside me, afraid of what news might come. I'm afraid to look at my phone, to check my email. I could be sent to prison for 3 years any day, with or without my still breastfeeding child, and I cannot decide which is worse. Most of us are simply mothers returning home with our children to our own countries. We had no idea what the Hague Convention was, no prior knowledge of international abduction laws. We were unprepared for the horror of losing our children and for the lifelong aftermath that follows a forced return. You carry that loss forever in your heart, in family court, in society, and in the very country that took your child from you, while you fight just for the chance to see them again. And even if you do gain access, life is never the same. You can't go on vacations like normal families without permission or instilled fear. You don't have the freedom to live your life. Instead, you live under the permanent brand of child abductor. I am not a criminal. I am a loving mother, and I will never stop fighting for my daughter. Thank you.